business segment of Nidec. Most specifically, we're looking at Nidec Motors Corporation's new product of the Foresight sensors, looking at temperature and vibrations. But with the rollout of this project, there will be challenges. We're going to start with the first challenge of how the current service is structured within our industry. It's really route-based maintenance. While with the Foresight sensors, we're able to incorporate additional data, allowing us to go to conditional-based and ultimately predictive. Next, we're going to look at the positioning of this product within our sales chain. Currently, we have Nidec selling to the OEMs and MROs that ultimately sells the end users. And we don't really want to disrupt this supply or the sales channel with product that is supplemental to our core product of motors. Next, we need to deal with our customer relations. We don't want to present this as cutting into our middle channel's sales, and so we want to present it as a complement rather than as a competitive tool. And finally, we need to look at the data privacy rules and regulations. Since Nidec is a global company operating in a variety of markets, it's facing a variety of data rules and regulations, and it needs to tailor its implementation to those rules. This leads us into our recommendations. We have 3 recommendations addressing 4 key criteria. First, we're looking at a data tiers subscription service that is going to be segmented based off of the data privacy rules. Next, we're going to look at OEMs and MROs kind of serving as a consulting service, which builds on our first recommendation, tailoring it to be more cooperative than competitive. Next, we're going to look at the product and platform expansion. Where is this going in the future? How do we see this growing going forward? Now, Bailey will talk about our first recommendation.
Okay, so our first recommendation is a tiered subscription system to our MROs, OEMs, and our end users. So in order first to facilitate this type of agreement, we need to first own the data of our sensors. We can do this by structuring our different agreements and contracts with our MROs, OEMs, and data users in order to say that we own the data, or that you own the data, excuse me. Secondly, you have a lot of data. So you have the data that comes from your sensors. You have the data that comes from the legacy data from your customers, from your OEMs, your MROs, and then finally you have your data algorithms. That's a lot of responsibility that you have to manage and then protect. And to further complicate this responsibility, you're an international company. You're in multiple countries with multiple different types of privacy and data laws and regulations. So in order to develop a system for and a structure for this data regulation and privacy, we've looked at multiple different countries, specifically the 4 top countries that countries and regions that NMC operates in via like Salesforce or sales numbers. And we've segmented that data into different types of access. So first of all, looking at the United States. The United States has pretty lax data privacy laws compared to other countries and other segments. Data that's generated in the United States can be taken out of the United States and utilized in other countries. In addition, you have to let your customers know what you're using that data for. Countries and regions like the EU and Japan have similar structures when it comes to data regulations. So, for example, for their data transmission, they have different lists of countries that you can take that data to. However, countries can work with it, or companies, can work within those regulations by structuring their contracts with the customers and with the companies to let them know what's going on with their data. Finally, the third segment is China. So countries like China are different than these other segments. China in particular has laws that prohibit the transmission of scientific, technological, and economic data overseas. So that means that data generated in China needs to stay in China. So that really prohibits the use of China data in comparison to the other countries. China also has a lot of protection laws based on different categories of data, so that's something that you need to take into consideration when you're operating in these countries. So we say that you need to have the subscription system. We also said that you have a lot of data. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to use this tiered system to moderate the amount of data that each of your end consumers and your customers have access to. For example, Nidec has access to all the data, the raw data, the broad data, the refined data. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we want to restrict access to the data so that companies know what specifically pertains to them. So for example, the end users are going to have the data that's specifically applicable to their industry, to their business. So what's that going to look like? So for end users, this applies to end users. We're going to have 2 levels of subscription, the basic level and then the premier level. The basic level is basically what exists today. So these end users are going to have access to their own sensors data. And then when you step up to the premier level, they're not only going to have access to their own data, they're going to have access to the reports of the overall data, the average data of the machine type by the same OEM. So what's the benefit of this to the end user? They're going to be able to benchmark their progress. They're going to be able to benchmark the life of the machine, the amount of repairs, the time between repairs, what type of repairs, that sort of thing, so they have greater visibility into their machine, and through that, greater visibility into how that affects their company. And when it comes to, when it comes to OEMs and MROs, we're going to have a 2-tiered system. The basic system is what exists today, just access to their own sensors and data. However, we want to have a premium level subscription where they have access to their own data and data of the average industry for that same type of machine. Again, this is really useful for benchmarking. So they can see how their machines shape up against people within the industry and with different applications within industry. So they can see how long are their machines lasting. Are they lasting a lot longer? Are they lasting without repairs compared to other types of machines? If so, great, that's a selling point for them. However, if there's specific things that are breaking down throughout all industries, whether it's a specific type of industry, whether it's a specific part of the machine that's breaking down for a specific reason, they can better identify this and work to correct that issue. So this type of utilization of the technology really adds to the competitive advantage of our OEMs and MROs instead of taking away from our customers. We don't want to position ourselves as a competitor. We're a complement and we're a competitive advantage to our customers. And to talk more about how this technology really aids our OEMs and MROs, we have Maria.
Thank you, Bailey. So as you stated, we want to position Foresight as a complement rather a competitor in this market because of its nature that can disrupt the market. Therefore, we recommend that the data is used to create an ability for OEMs as well as MROs to have additional service feature, and that is the optimization consultation service. They would use the data that they purchase to have data comparisons and use them as analytical tools to provide benchmarking opportunities for their end users and improve hence their service and their revenue that they're losing due to less maintenance. Now, in order to have that data readily available, we need to collect them and provide them to our users. To do that, we would ask the end users and OEMs as well as MROs to integrate legacy systems along with any additional data on the machines that they're using and their system logs so that we're able to create analytical insights, on the machine specifics as user-specific machines, as well as all OEM's machine averages and industry averages that can be used for the data comparison. Now, to demonstrate how that uses, we created the dashboard with the additional feature of data comparison. Above, you are able to see in the top part of the screen the machine-specific data, along with its temperature, the heat, vibrations, that it goes over time, but also below you're able to see industry averages. You're able to pinpoint specific points that you want to look at to see the specific conditions that led to that result. And based on that, if the machine is not operating optimally, you can use the industry standard averages to find benchmarking opportunities and be able to recommend those implementation practices to your end users that would be able to prolong their machine usage life. Now, we're aware that this reduces the profitability of OEMs and MROs. Therefore, the real-time access that they will have to the data will increase their efficiency in servicing those machines because they will be already able to predict what the cause is and use that predictive maintenance feature. but they will be able to provide an additional service, a consultation service, that will expand their customer experience spectrum that they're really wishing to keep. Furthermore, as for end users, they have this feature and additional service from their providers, but also they will save 19% on their maintenance cost. And as well for you, you will be able to have all this data from industries, from specific user machines, as well as all OEM machines, that you will be able to use information for your own product improvements and better product designs later on. Now, to talk about our third recommendation, I'll hand it off to Jack.
Thank you. So as I'm sure you guys are well aware, the sensor product has 3 metrics and capabilities which allow it to do this predictive maintenance. These 3 metrics and capabilities include its connectivity, which allows it to communicate, the ability to measure temperature, and its ability to measure the vibrations. And in doing this, like I said, it has that predictive maintenance capabilities, but those aren't the only metrics and capabilities that allow for this sort of predictive maintenance. Additionally, there are like the voltmeter, which allows for measuring of volt pressure flow, as well as measuring of current with the ammeter. So these metrics were found in an interview conducted in 2017 by Thomas Sharp, who talked about how he hopes the sensor in the future progresses to get to the point where it has both of these capabilities. We researched the industry, we looked at various surveys that have been taking place, and we realized that not only would these be useful in this sort of setting, but additionally they are of demand for manufacturers and machineries. So we recommend that these metrics actually be put into place into the sensor and incorporated into the product going forward. Additionally, we're recommending our own metric that should be added to the product, which is the bearing fault gauge, which just measures the malfunctions and lubricants of bearings. But there's not room for expansion only in the products, there's also room for expansion in the platform itself. So by looking at trends of the industry, we've realized that the most advantageous products and platforms are ones that are compatible with other products and platforms. So using this reasoning, we're suggesting that we have configure Foresight so it's compatible with other data platforms and Internet of Things platforms, so it can compile and aggregate all the data and then send it off back to the platform Foresight, to where it can be modeled and allow for us to make more informed decisions based off of whatever's going on in the manufacturing unit. So this data aggregation would take place in the cloud, and from there, though, there might be some questions raised. For instance, like what if the platforms use different services or they're not compatible? Well, by using a tool such as Google Weave, we can actually bring all of these together and put them on the same plane, allowing them to be aggregated. Another question raised might be, what about liabilities that might occur because of bringing together different forms of data? Well, since we're using only existing infrastructures and technologies, we didn't expect there to be any additional liabilities that didn't already exist, only an increased optimization of the workflow. As far as implementation goes, we're hoping to transition both the service providers and the end users throughout the beginning of 2018, and through there we'll be able to roll out the products. And through 2019 we'll collect this data, and in the collection of the data, we'll then by 2020 be able to have this full-blown consultancy where the data is being analyzed and we have accurate industry averages that can be provided to both the end users and the different service providers. To talk more about the implementation impacts we have, Davis.
Thank you. So looking at the financials, we had to make several key assumptions. So I'd like to lay a few of these out to start. First, we made the assumption that we're going to start with just unit sales for the sensors of 1,000 in the first year. Then we had to determine a growth rate, and we based this off of the global IoT sales trends over the last few years, which we determined to be about 17%. With these two factors, we plot an exponential model over 5 years to get this column of sensor units sold over the course of 5 years. The next assumption that we had to make was the amount of data produced by each sensor. This is probably one of our rougher estimates because that information for the specific sensors wasn't readily available, but we made the assumption that it was going to be 5 terabytes of data per sensor per year, resulting in this column of cumulative gigabytes of data produced over the course of 5 years, really highlighting what our data storage needs are, as well as the amount of data that we're going to have to be able to process and analyze. This leads us into kind of our full, fleshed out financial for the operating impacts of our recommendations. And there are a few key assumptions on this page as well. The first one that we have to make is our sales growth rate for current products. We looked at fiscal years 2015 and fiscal years 2016 to determine a growth rate of about 11%. And then we had to use this to estimate the financials for 2017. This is because the fiscal year 2017 only ended a couple days ago, so those financials aren't publicly available yet. And so with that, we estimated this column. Going from that, we applied the same 11% growth rate to current existing products throughout the course of 5 years, and then added the impacts of our recommendations. And this is going to be reflected in the 3 rows of net sales, cost of sales, and R&D expenses. The net sales, we're going to see the sales of the sensors themselves, as well as the subscription service that's offered to our clients, both as OEMs, MROs, and end users. Then we're going to see the cost of sales related to the production of those sensors and the cost of storing data, as well as providing the analytical features that we would like to over that data. That final row of R&D expenses is really related to our third recommendation about where we see this product going, what features and what features are the sensors going to contain, and how are we seeing the platform progressing going forward. And so we've adjusted the R&D expenses to grow in line with what we expect that to be. Our final row here is where it counts, the operating profit. In 2017, we forecasted that it would be about $213 million US dollars, based off of our assumptions for growth. And then applying all of our components of our recommendations, we ended up with a operating profit of $641 million by 2022. With these results in mind, we believe that our recommendations are what's best because it provides value throughout the sales channel. Not only is it providing value at the top, but it's addressing that concern of competition in the middle. It's really showing that it's a cooperative product of providing efficiency and value for all involved. With that, we'd like to open the floor to any questions you have.
I'll start. First of all, I like the fact, or the idea you guys came up with in regards to the consulting services, using the data that NIDEC could collect potentially and using that to both the advantage of NIDEC for future research and development, as well as using it to the benefit of their customers to create, more efficiencies operationally. The question I had in terms of the subscription model you guys had talked about is that a lot of the OEMs out there that NIDEC partners with, as well as the OEMs more specifically, are also developing their own IoT platforms and trying to monetize the data that, shouldn't say monetize, but what's the incentive for the OEMs to pay us for data when they could go in and collect their own data, essentially, with their own sensors and so forth.
So we looked into that, and we figured that the benefit would be, since we already have the existing infrastructure and we have the existing motors and platforms in place, we're saving them the additional research and development costs and costs of executing that sort of implementation out into the work field. And since the company's already so large, it allows them to have a bigger reach as far as if they were to try to expand any products or services, since our motors go so far. Does that answer your question to some degree?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, like I said, I'm just a little concerned about the pushback from the OEMs. I thought your thought with your consideration of expanding the current platform to measure other metrics as well, with the forget what it was, the voltage and different things.
Yes.
I think that that's a good thought. I'm just wondering how intrusive that would be into the OEM's moving parts, because, you know, the benefit of the Foresight system right now is that it's a magnet that attaches to the motors and measures the heat and vibration. But it's a good thought, you know, and you guys did talk about the fact that the device that NIDEC would offer in the marketplace could potentially augment the data that the OEMs are collecting, and, you know, that might give them a more, you know, a broader view of what's going on, you know, not just with the machines, but, you know, maybe the platform it's mounted on. So, yeah.
I like the idea of the different tiers of data access. I think that's good, and I think it's also, just in terms of knowledge and experience, the end users aren't going to necessarily have the knowledge of analyzing some of that data that the OEMs and potentially NEDEC, if we invested heavily in our vibration analysis and created a segment of our group to do that. So I thought that was a good idea. I also like positioning Foresight as the complement. I think that's the key of our goals here. We're not trying to, you know, put one of these on every single motor we make. It's really a complementary thing that's only going to benefit you. So that was, I'm glad I captured that. I thought you guys had a great grabber at the beginning of the presentation. I thought that was cool how you guys bounced off each other. So I
Dramatic.
everyone, I think, got their attention grabbed, so that was good. And I also liked how you just kind of outlined where you were going with the presentation and never lost sight of that. Good job.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to criticize. You did some things very, very well, especially compared to some of the other teams. The exposition of the challenges of the data ownership and privacy, both in the regulatory sphere as well as on the ground, that was very good. Some of the other teams didn't really address that, especially in today's environment, you know, where every day in the newspaper there's headlines. Facebook is just the latest in a long series of issues. So that's going to be something in the forefront of everybody's mind, so it's good to address that up front. That was a good job. Something else I thought you did a very good job on that other teams didn't really do was the way you hit the financial metrics. There's no real track record going forward. We're inventing a new, basically a new business model. So you to some extent, you're extrapolating in an informational vacuum. I thought you did a great job with the spreadsheet showing where this is going, and any customers really, that's kind of the key. That's where the rubber meets the road. Where's the financial benefit? What can we expect? And I also noted, expanding the information gathering to the electrical issues and the bearings. That was a great idea. How to expand even further on this proposed. Also, one of the key benefits to the intermediate users, the MROs and OEMs, is the benchmarking opportunity to see how everything's compared and the level set and see where you are. So that was all good stuff. I didn't really have any particular criticisms. Some of the presenters, other teams were kind of falling all over each other, speaking so fast you couldn't really understand them. I think you did a good job presenting the material in a clear and understandable way. So good job. It's a really good job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, one thing you could have addressed better was the pushback you're going to get from the end users, and their loss of control and access to data. That's going to be a hard thing for a lot of them as well. And it's something you may want to.
You may not position it to where they know they're getting less data, right? I mean, you don't want to be manipulative, but at the end of the day, if they're buying the product, they're going to want that access. So it's interesting.
You're going to really enjoy this better having less data. That's a tough conversation.
Yeah, I think the other challenge also is going to be, when we compare it to the route-based maintenance and the potential loss of revenue to the MROs, maybe looking at some financial data there, what is the potential loss in revenue, and how are the consulting services going to make up for it? Are they going to make up for it? And then you know, maybe thinking about alternative maintenance models, you know, seasonally based, need-based, to where, you know, the revenue related to the traditional route-based model is, you know, you're not actually going to lose anything. You're just going to have it more focused based on, you know, peak seasons and so forth.
We did look a little bit at the revenue loss. It was in the appendix, but basically for compressor OEMs, the U.S. Department of Energy predicted or said that 4% of their revenues are related to those service contracts. So it's not a huge portion of their service contracts. They're still going to have service contracts in place that just going to be scaled back a little bit. They're going to be able to provide those more efficiently. So they're going to see profitability benefits while their revenue might decrease a little bit. So their bottom line's still going to be solid.
Good job.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank y'all so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.